I've started the practice session. Are you able to log in? You should have been able to get into the practice session. Oh, he's joining? Oh, okay. Okay, let me see. I need to remove this. Sorry, ma'am.
Hello? Hello?
Need to touch anything. It will be managed from elsewhere.
Yes, it's online. So if you just put that in your pocket and then when you're finished,
Mhm.
then it comes.
Na nataka kwenda college ama university. Au now we just lazima aende college. Ajui?
It's
Okay.
And I'm the last of the class.
I would imagine we would stand up. I don't know. Whichever.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Ah.
when you're doing standing up. Run through what like your little citing like where you work when you're there in the so like I can't raise it for fine.
Okay.
I think that if he's giving his talk, it's okay to stand. Yeah, I think when you stand, I think you find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Space.
Everyone, it's everyone, really.
You know, if you come down to it,
About here. I have my notes here.
Stand. Yeah. I don't know any. I'm not too bothered with the stands, the sea.
Well, if you're talking your age, what will I talk about? You know, you don't mention bones. We say you don't mention bones where there are older people.
Welcome, everyone. We're just getting a few last logistics fixed up, so please bear with us just a few more seconds. Thank you. So is everyone okay? Yeah. Okay, so a warm welcome to you all. It's wonderful to see you here. This is the 8th year that we have run the Africa Prospects and Forecasts. So I'm Dr. Hazel Gray. I'm the director of the Centre of African Studies. And this event has been co-organised with the Royal African Society and with Edinburgh Global. And really delighted to see you all here in this exciting panel. I've got the shortest of jobs to do, but maybe the most important, which is to introduce our moderator. Mary Joboson has very kindly agreed to moderate the panel, and we're very proud of her. She's a student here at Edinburgh University, and she's also a Mastercard Foundation Scholar at the Edinburgh Futures Institute, where she is pursuing an MSc in Data, Inequality and Society. She has very glowing academic credentials with a Bachelor of Law with distinction from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and she is a member of the Nigerian Bar Association. So previously, before she joined us here at Edinburgh University, Mary practiced law at a leading African law firm. And she has an interest in exploring the intersection of data, societal and commercial considerations and law, as well as using data-driven insights to inform policymaking. So without further ado, I'd like to start the evening and hand over to Mary, our moderator.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, members of the council, and members of the community of the University of Edinburgh who are here in person and online. It's my great honor to welcome you to the 2024 Prospects and Forecasts for Africa. It promises to be a very interesting event, and I'm so honored to be moderating it today. We have a delectable lineup of panelists, speakers who are going to take us through very important pertinent issues in Africa and that affect the global world as well. So I'm really, really looking forward to the beauty of our discussions. And I'm just going to give us a bit of a rundown of how this is going to work. So we are going to talk about a lot of things, including the global landscape when it comes to elections, because 2024 is the year of elections, not just in Africa, but all around the globe. And it's quite significant because this has an effect on policies and the lives that people live. So we're very interested to talk about that. We're also going to be talking about entrepreneurship and innovation, because entrepreneurship and small businesses and large businesses as well are the bedrock of most societies and most economies. And we find out that there's a lot of barriers to getting financing and funding, and our speakers are going to speak to that and also consider the Africa Free Trade. Oh, I'm so sorry. AFTA is literally what I just have in mind whenever I think about that. I literally cannot remember what it stands for at this point. So we're going to talk about AFTA. We're also going to talk about the global buzzword, as we all know. And I'm not just saying it's a buzzword because it's not impactful, because we all know that climate change is here and we have to deal with it now. And so we're going to talk about that on the global perspective. We're also going to talk about health in Africa. And to that end, we're going to talk about the nurses report. We have a speaker who's going to speak to that. And we also have a speaker who has done some work when it comes to pandemic preparedness and has even authored a book on it. So we definitely have a lot in store for you today. I'm going to just go ahead to introduce my speakers. I'm very, very sure that they are exceptional in their various fields of interest and study, and so they're going to really take us through. First, we have Joyce Onuonga. She is the Director General Manager of John White & Son. We're happy to have you here. We also have at the far end, Dr. Tom Molony. He's a senior lecturer in African Studies here at the University of Edinburgh. We have Dr. Samuel Mwaura. He's a lecturer in entrepreneurship and innovation at the University of Edinburgh as well. Next to him, we have Professor Liz Grant. She's the assistant principal and director of the Global Health Academy at the University of Edinburgh. And we have next to her, Professor Aisha Holloway, who is a professor of nursing studies and co-director of Edinburgh Global Nursing Initiative. And right next to me, we have Dr. Jeffrey Banda, who is a senior lecturer in the Science, Technology, and Innovation Studies Department in the School of Social and Political Sciences here at the University of Edinburgh as well. We're definitely looking forward to their insights and just to learn from their expertise as well. I'm going to start off with Joyce. She's going to be speaking to doing business in Africa, just talking about the challenges and giving us an overview in terms of focus.
Okay. Speak up. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, rather. My name is Joyce Onuonga, as you've been told, and I live in Fife, run industrial weighing machines company, John White & Son Weighing Machines. Doing business in Africa, an interesting topic for 5 minutes. I couldn't think how I would present that, quite difficult. But here we go. As we all know, it's not a secret that there are a number of challenges doing business in Africa. But as the saying goes, success is determined not by the obstacles, but by how we approach those obstacles. Like another place, Africa is a continent, not a country. And that difference is the starting point of creating the philosophy of doing business in Africa. What do we need to be aware of when we are looking at business in Africa? The infrastructure gap. If you have not been there, not done business there, that can be quite an issue of traveling from one place to the other and how things are work there. So you have to understand that. Understand how local business communities mitigate this. There is no data that is readily available in most parts. So you have to find out how best do you gather data to come up to some conclusions in doing your business. Be aware of the regional blocks because this can be very beneficial if you are looking at a country and then the regional blocks. There is the SADC, there's the East African community, there are all these, but there are individual countries as well. How do you tap into this so that you are able to scale up whatever you want to do? The cost of doing business, currency fluctuation and all that, take this into consideration when you are doing your research before you get into business. The social and political situations of each country, understand that so that when you are building your relationships and networks, you are not caught up in this. The environmental situations in each country or area where you're working in. Then there's the regulations and the financial issues. Pay attention to that. Once you have this, then you are getting closer to starting your business in Africa. Why do you want to do business in Africa? Must be the question you are asking yourself. You have to understand the philosophy behind doing business and making a gainful difference. If you are going there to just transact, you might be frustrated. But if you want to go there, make your money, make business, but make a difference, then you will be motivated. So really be very clear why you are doing business in Africa. Sharing resources can be very beneficial. The skill you have, the knowledge you have, the contacts you have, if you are sharing, they will share. You will find that wherever you're going, they're going to share this. And this helps create a very healthy business environment. Patient space. In Africa, you have to be patient. You get an appointment, 8 o'clock, you'll be seen probably, if you're lucky, at 11 o'clock. Be patient. It pays eventually, but patience is there. So if you're going for a business trip, add an extra day or two. Build the right relationships. There are relationships that fail. Be very careful. The relationships that you're building there, the networks that you're building, if you take your time to do this, it will pay off and you will do good business. It takes time, but it pays off. What are the opportunities in Africa? Innovation, I would say, is the topmost. If you are going to look at business in Africa, have an innovative way of approaching business. If you're going to do it selling in the supermarket like everybody else does, you're going to struggle. Things have moved on and there's huge competition, but there are opportunities and great opportunities. Be innovative in the way you're doing it. The agriculture sector, energy, water, the blue economy, mining, scaling up small businesses and partnerships. There are great opportunities there. Infrastructure. Africa is rapidly on its way closing the infrastructure gap. How can businesses, investors, and research institutions gainfully tap into this? A huge young population in Africa, growing, eager to learn, and the opportunities are there. How can we work with this population who are eager to learn to give the right skills that are going to engender innovation so that when you go there, when we go there as businesses, we tap into this because it's readily available. This goes also to the diaspora community who are here. We have a big diaspora community in Scotland, in the UK. How do we tap into this to make sure that this resource, human resource, which is so scarce, can be utilized for development and doing business in Africa? There is a big opportunity there to be had. We have to be realistic that while Scotland is unlikely to make multi-million investments in Africa, Scotland has an outstanding research and innovation ecosystem. And that is something that we should be proud of. Through research with our universities, research organization, and private sector, Scotland should create a large value supply chain with high value jobs and training opportunities. And this is doable if we set our minds to work collaboratively. I'll give an example. I am a member, besides John White and Son, I'm a board member of Scottish African Business Association, SEBA. And through SEBA, Fraser, who is sat there, who is the CEO, has worked tirelessly with various organizations, but I'll mention one, which is the James Hutton Institute, based in Dundee. Through SEBA, James Hutton Institute, who have developed 6 different breeds of potatoes, specifically for the Kenyan soil, climate, pests, is focused on meeting the needs of local consumer demand. They have worked together, and SEBA introduced the James Hutton Foundation Institute to KEFIS, who are the regulatory body in Kenya, organized high-level meetings with the government. And as a result of that, the James Hutton Institute was able to penetrate into the Kenyan market with this type of potatoes. Then what did they do? Again, through SEBA, they were able to identify local partners and entrepreneurs to take up the seeds and scale it up so that it was planted at scale. And also made sure that there was access to training and education program for food security and local job creation. It didn't stop there. SEBA, again, went further to identify partners for processing facility and funding, access to funding. The investment for this was not that large, but this has opened up a supply chain for Scotland, UK business, and Kenya, and more importantly, food security and jobs. So it can be done. Private sector also can come in with universities, doing research and creating innovative way of doing different things. Because we are limited with time, I was really constrained on what I could say and not say, but I hope I've managed to give just a snapshot of how it is to do business in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. That was very fantastic. I love how detailed that was, and it kind of reminded me of my job, which I forgot. Please, I have to remind you, I'm obligated to remind you, please turn your phones down. You can turn them off or make sure they're on silent so that we don't miss anything and we're not distracted at all. And I do have to say, for safety purposes, in the event that you hear a fire alarm, it is not a drill. Please use the exit. And now back to Joyce's presentation. I saw a lot of beautiful things in terms of the emphasis on context, you know, in terms of grassroots participation. And that actually leads to our next speaker, because we can see how important it is to be contextual, even when you're doing business, even when you're conducting elections, because the people matter and the people differ from geographical region to another. And even within Africa, with its 54 countries. And so with that, I will be introducing our next speaker, Dr. Tom, to take us through the major political landscape in Africa, covering elections as well.
Thanks very much. Natasha, can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Natasha, can you put the slide on? There you go. Great. Thanks so much. I think your briefing notes say 5 to 7 minutes. Those 2 minutes make a difference. And in the prior briefing, we were talking about 10 minutes, but I'll see how this goes. Okay, it's a global year of elections. More than 60 countries, representing half the world's population. Some 4 billion people are scheduled to hold regional, legislative, and presidential elections this year. Some of those are foregone conclusions. Putin will almost certainly be re-elected in Russia. and Kagame in Rwanda. The outcome of the US presidential election is less predictable. Significant change on American foreign policy towards African nations more likely to come with a change of president. If Trump wins, we know from his last presidency that his foreign policy will be unpredictable. Trump foreign policy may return to its previous intent, which was to save money and/or to free states from what he regarded as foreign entanglements. If American isolationism prevails, then this could have a knock-on effect to other countries. They may also prefer to behave in a more self-interested way. The US, China, Russia in particular still see Africa as important for their investment and security partnerships. As the influence of China and Russia grows on the continent, more African rulers may no longer recognize a need to comply with the West's democratic rules in exchange for aid and investments. The European Parliament has elections in June. Polls indicate that far-right parties will make substantial gains. This is likely to influence the EU's policy stance on issues such as climate change and immigration. At the European country level, rising disaffection with the political establishment increases the likelihood mainstream parties will co-opt some of the more radical policies coming from the far right and far left parties, particularly on immigration. At the same time, and Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Molony, no relation, is a recent example of this. We're seeing efforts to reconnect with African leaders to influence them on the destination of their energy exports. So I now turn to Africa. As in elections outside Africa, one relatively new factor that may influence election outcomes on the continent is generative artificial intelligence. AI currently makes up a small fraction of the overall contested information space, but its usage is likely to become more common. It's already begun to undermine democratic discourse around elections. The timing of disinformation can be hugely significant. Most African countries have a media blackout over election-related content, somewhere between 3 days to 24 hours before polling, and this prevents challenges to the debunking of generated content that goes viral before voting. Another feature around this point of recent African elections is internet blocks, blackouts, becoming more common tool in the government handbook of electoral meddling. Before I turn to some presidential elections, it's worth making a couple of general points. The first, elections are more than those, more than who will be the next national leader. People often talk of the election in the singular as if it was only one. International media focus tends to be on the next president or prime minister. And domestic media also has this gaze, but also covers other elections that in many countries happen on the same day. In Kenya 2022, 6 ballots in one series of elections. Elections aren't one day. What's known as the electoral cycle approach appreciates elections are continuous processes rather than standalone events. Much is decided in advance of the presidential elections. The selection of candidates often decided within the parties, sometimes by a very small executive, and can be very corrupt at local and national level. Parties' primaries are important, who gets to stand, and these tend to be much less observed than the big election day focus that the media often has. Primaries can also be very brutal. There are often localized acts of violence and intimidation that go unreported. By-elections are also important. Zimbabwe had National Assembly by-elections last week. ZANU-PF won 6 constituencies, all 6, and in doing so gained a 2/3 parliamentary majority that allowed it to change the constitution. The timing of presidential elections can also influence the timing of change. Roads tend to be fixed before elections. Other reforms can be put off. In Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu Hassan has postponed the constitutional review process, a key demand of the opposition, until after next year's elections. This year, Tanzania has local government elections, which, as in other countries, can help gauge the electoral mood and influence prevailing politics in the presidential elections. Okay, some African presidential elections in 2024. I'm wary of prioritizing elections in any particular country or suggesting some are more important than others. Elections are most important for the citizens in those countries where they're being held. For that reason, I put less emphasis on the perceived importance of a country and more on the issues surrounding the elections there. I'll canter through chronologically, not all 19 of them. I can't cover them all. Anyone know the first elections of 2024? Anyone? Anyone? Comoros. The BBC's lead on this was authorities in Comoros have cut the access to the internet in the wake of protests against the re-election of President Azali Asmani. Cutting of the internet was the headline there, with BBC at least. Anyone know the next scheduled elections, 2024? Mali, last Sunday the 4th, didn't happen. Military junta of Colonel Assimi Goïta has again postponed the holding of elections to restore a civilian democratic government, despite repeated assurances to do so. And along with Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso form the three Sahelian military regimes that have withdrawn from ECOWAS. Burkina Faso is meant to hold elections in July. The leader of the military junta, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, says elections are, quote, not a priority. Chad is due to hold presidential legislative elections in November, when coup leader General Mahamat Déby is highly likely to orchestrate that he remains in power. Guinea, led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya's military junta, has committed to holding elections by December this year. This was agreed with ECOWAS, but at the moment there's positive signs. And Guinea can be differentiated from the others I've mentioned, the other putschists, in that the ousting of the previous leader was because the previous leader had gone over the two-term, or proposed to go over the two-term constitutional limit. And also the junta are saying that at the moment that their current military rulers can't be part of the government. So a bit of a difference there. Next scheduled elections for 2024? Anyone? Okay, I wrote this on Saturday and I had to change it. Thank you. Well, no, that's now in December. Or it's a lot later in the year. Yeah, so on Saturday, Senegal's President Macky Sall announced the election scheduled for the 25th of this month, postponed. He's confirmed he won't be running, which is good. He said he'd start an open national dialogue to create the conditions for a free, transparent, and inclusive election in a reconciled Senegal. And this is following outcry over the clearances of candidates to succeed him. I won't go into the detail there. It's tense at the moment. Mobile phone access to internet's been cut. Yesterday, MPs delayed presidential elections until the 15th of December after a contentious vote in the National Assembly in the absence of the opposition. That's our colleague Rama Dieng yesterday on France 24. On the topic of postponement, President Salva Kiir of South Sudan has announced the country is to have elections in December. He's done this a lot of times, but they still need to do a census and adopting a new constitution, which you can't do in a hurry, so watch this space with that. South Africa is holding general elections sometime between May and August. President Cyril Ramaphosa gets to decide when. It's reported that he wants to bring forward the national and provincial elections to capitalize on the popularity of the country's case at the ICJ. I don't have time to go into the politics of all the different parties there, but there's a good chance that ANC it will have a much reduced vote. We'll see what happens. There seems to be a fragmented or many opposition parties there. Somaliland, an interesting one, recognized by the UN as de jure part of Somalia. It signed recently an MOU with Ethiopia, allowing its landlocked neighbor to lease part of a port for military use in exchange for recognizing Somaliland as an independent state. It's good for Somaliland, brings in money. Strategic location on the Red Sea, brings in security implications. So that issue is likely to dominate there. Just finishing off now, Namibia, interesting. Another one I had to change. On Sunday, the president passed away. He was due to leave anyway. It looked as if he was very much going to do that, constitutional limit, mandated limit. SWAPO's candidate at the moment, Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwa, Deputy PM, could be Namibia's first female president. And of those that looked as if they can get the most votes, of the top 6, 3 of them are women. So quite a highlight there. I'll finish off now with Ghana, elections in December. The economy has tanked under retiring president Nana Akufo-Addo. Afrobarometer survey scores suggest that at the moment, it's almost certain that his NPP party's Mamadou Bawumia, the vice president, will lose to NDC, with former President John Mahama returned to power. Ghanaian voters tend to change the ruling party every other election. There have been peaceful transfers between those in the past. This pattern and the state of the economy suggest that Mahama is in a strong position. At the moment, 2024 is an unpredictable year in terms of elections. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Tom, I do confirm you did go over this time significantly. I want to make sure that your guilt is well placed. But I do appreciate the complexity of African elections and how you went through that. That's amazing, because we have so much insights from that. And it just speaks to the fact of how sometimes stability is not something you can quite determine in terms of how fluid things can be on the African electoral landscape. You see people, you see countries postponing their elections, you see the uprisings, you see the back and forth between what the electorate wants and what the governments or the parties, the predominant parties at the time. And it has me thinking in terms of entrepreneurship as well, which is leading to our next speaker. How does that instability factor in? Because if you're talking about the regular things that are expected in terms of change of power, and so you can imagine a regular person who is also trying to run a business, how difficult that can be in such landscapes. So I'm going to invite our next speaker, Dr. Samuel, to speak to the entrepreneurship and innovation outlook and to give us some insights on the participation rates in Africa. Dr. Samuel?
Okay, thank you very much. Now, can I just start by saying, one of the really interesting things about doing a PhD and pursuing a career in academia is you spend 4 years, well, 3 if you're really smart, just being trained intensively to be critical, skeptical, almost cynical, and then you spend the rest of your life doing that. So I struggled quite a lot to find like a happy story to bring to this talk today. And when I was thinking about, what you can talk about entrepreneurship and economic development, one of the really striking happy stories is that, Africa is the only continent where female entrepreneurship does better than male entrepreneurship. So I think that's a good thing that deserves a bit of a cheer, actually. Yeah. However, so as you can see in my, I don't know if it's very clear or too busy. So this is data from 2022 within the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. I tried to put a QR code up there. You can look up the reports if you want. So the way we study entrepreneurship within the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is by doing adult population surveys. So we have the same questionnaire across the world, and you have people in the general population being asked about their entrepreneurial activity, and we group those in various ways. So there's 2 main indicators we focus on, and the first one is total early stage entrepreneurial activity, which is the chart here. And you can see the rate there across the world is about 10% for women And in the countries that we have sampled, Togo is doing really well. You've got almost 30% of adult women trying to set up a business in the early stages. Yeah, but if you look at these other chart here, which is more kind of established businesses that are more than 3.5 years old and have been paying wages and things, that rate goes down to 5.5% for women across the world. And the leading country in Africa that was sampled in 2022, that it goes down from over 28% to around 18%. So you can see, although we can speak positively of female entrepreneurs in Africa doing really well, the situation kind of changes depending on the type of entrepreneurship you're looking at. And you can also see the diversity between countries. So in 2022, we had Togo, Tunisia, Morocco, South Africa, Egypt. And you can see there's differences in the way those countries report, entrepreneurship participation rates amongst women. And in previous years, when it's been, Uganda and, other countries in Africa, Ghana, Mozambique, other countries you can see in previous reports that have taken part in this. The story is always the same, that on average, female entrepreneurship in Africa is really high, but you have variability between especially in patriarchal societies where, women, have been oppressed by structures that are, controlled by men. So by engaging in entrepreneurship, women are able to do things they care about, express themselves, and earn a wage to support themselves and their families as well. So you have some emancipatory kind of aspects to that, right? And then what happens is, these women that engage in business get to kind of join business associations that gives them a little bit of agency and political voice and empowerment. They can change structures. But the overall link between entrepreneurship and development is very problematic. So if you look at the slide when we get it, you'll see that you observe more levels of entrepreneurship in poor countries. And globally, you tend to see more entrepreneurship when there's crisis, okay? So entrepreneurship is maybe not something you celebrate naively because there's a whole load of other things going on, okay? And especially, why is it that in richer countries you don't see a lot of entrepreneurship? Now, during the pandemic and previously in the global financial crisis, you saw entrepreneurship rate across the world going up. So it kind of suggests it's something people do when there are other difficulties, right? And in Africa, when crises happen, they tend to hit women harder, okay? So you have issues, complex issues that could explain that. You have a whole lot of absentee husbands and fathers. You have a very thin safety net. And as I mentioned before, you have patriarchal structures that are oppressive to women. And because of these, women are kind of trying to fight back by engaging in entrepreneurship within a heavily constrained environment. And then you also have a very interesting dynamic that's been happening since the 1990s, where you have a patriarchal structure in society, and at the same time, you've had the emergence of this kind of dismal boy-child situation. So you're having a system that is patriarchal, but with a lot of useless young men in it as well. And as women have been trying to fight back through entrepreneurship, they have to come up against these, and you observe very high rates of failure, and it's usually because the businesses aren't sustainably profitable. And you have other issues like access to finance, and that is explained in part by, again, the patriarchal structures, because you don't have collateral, because land is for the men. It's passed down the generations, and it's passed down to sons. So women do not have the collateral required to access finance. And then you have a generally difficult institutional environment. We were just hearing about the electioneering that happens in Africa, and it's constant. You know, the research suggests, you know, and it's not just research, it's people's experiences in Africa. In a 5-year election cycle, 2 years are lost to electioneering where nothing happens. And you have leaders of the country, grown men, standing on top of cars, hurling insults to other grown men, and telling obvious lies to entire populations. And that happens for 2 years within a 5-year election cycle, and nobody's really investing. Nobody knows what to do. And then you have the debt crisis that's going on just now. So you have governments across Africa looking for ways to expand their tax base. And that means they're, you know, they've become a massive headache to small business owners because they're looking for anywhere they can get money. You know, they're not cutting their salaries, obviously, but they're hustling the small businesses. And what this means is that small businesses remain micro because, you know, if you start to grow, you become more visible and you become a target. Do you want to do that? Do you want to become a target for authorities for tax compliance, which means a higher, you know, bill for you in bribes, you know? So it's difficult, and it's just harder, you know, to set up and run a business and comply with all the various things. But if you look forward to prospects, you know, we had Joyce talking about the trading blocks, and these trading blocks do have opportunities, but you have a very silly situation where you have, you know, the spaghetti ball phenomenon, where you have these kind of intersecting trading blocks that are just a massive bag of contradiction. So you have, for example, Tanzania. I'm originally from Kenya. Tanzania is within the East African community that was set up a long time ago, but it's also within a different trading bloc in the South African Development Corporation, simply because it has some historical kind of connections with South Africa and their fight for independence, fight against apartheid and things. And if you look at the landscape of trading blocks, it's impossible for anyone to kind of work out how that's going to happen. However, you've had developments in that space with the African Continental Free Trade Area being proposed.
Dr. Samuel, I would have to, you know, remind you of the time.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Right.
But thank you for
Yeah.
mentioning. Now I know what the after means.
I'll wrap
So
up in that.
at least
section.
there's that.
So, but we know from that slide there, the women are more likely to, you know, to set up businesses to basically, you know, make a positive change to the world. Well, you know, man, that's just a global situation. So if you look in Africa in the reports, you know, the differences are more acute. So we want more women to set up businesses because they have good intentions. But we also see, you know, more women are setting up businesses because they can't find jobs that work for them in terms of, you know, balancing out their household routines and that. And we also know from things that we've observed through COVID and historically, the female leadership is very good at kind of, you know, creating generally good outcomes for most people, not just the females. And the story is changing, actually. I mentioned in jest the situation with a boy child. Now, in the 1980s and 90s, the discourse at the time was, you know, how the girl child must trump the boy child, right? It was like a direct competition. We need to uplift the girl child, and, you know, the boy child will, or to hell with the boy child, right? So what's happened over the last several years is that, you know, there's been a realization the boy child's being neglected, and now it's the women now, you know, not men, it's the women fighting for the boy child, because, you know, we need, well, in society, we need brothers and fathers and husbands and people that have these kind of very aggressive, competitive way to approach business. And so you need that diversity. And women have come back to, you know, foster and nurture the boy child once again. And that is a good thing that we want, especially because
I'm about to assert my woman leadership
Yeah.
right now.
yeah, I will say
Leadership is good for women. I'm
Yes.
about to assert it right now.
I will say this sitting down that you know, the boy child is a, you know, an upstanding, you know, eligible boy child is a scarce commodity in Africa, unless, of course, you are the son of my mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel, for that very engaging presentation. Very long, too, very long. I think a dangerous trend has been started by the boy child of some decades ago. We hope the girl children of some decades ago will end it. Oh, there is hope. So this really ties into our next speaker, just talking about the differences between richer and poorer countries in terms of entrepreneurship and how crisis is sometimes that nuanced reason why that happens. So I'm going to be introducing Professor Liz to speak to climate change. Dr. Samuel did say there were no happy stories, but there is one silver lining in this next speaker's topic, because she's talking about the COP28 and the first inaugural health day. So we're seeing that emphasis on health, and would really love to hear your insights on that.
Great, thank you. I'll stand, and I'll also ask my colleague Aisha, 5 minutes, tug me, so that I sit down. But thank you, it's been inspiring to hear so much. Is there a slide? Oh, I have a microphone on. Great. I don't know whether you can see this. What I'm speaking about, just very briefly, is the climate crisis, which has been mentioned throughout. And it's not a happy story. And the challenge here, if you can look at this map, the top map shows the sort of the countries who are responsible for the climate breakdown, the top map. And then the bottom map is showing the impact of the climate breakdown on health and mortality. And you can see across the countries that are most impacted, and the continent of Africa is significantly impacted by the climate crisis. The climate crisis is a health crisis. Now, what's extraordinary is that the COPs, the Conference of the Parties that meets every year to discuss the climate science and to sort of call on the community of countries to take action, had for the first time in December in Dubai, they recognized that health was critical to the climate agenda. That, in fact, that the climate crisis is a health crisis, and the health crisis is also driving the climate crisis. It's impossible to see that little map, but what I want, that little circular thing, but what I want to say just very briefly is that you've got direct impacts of the climate crisis on health, and those are the obvious ones. And these are the ones that you know the data for, which is shocking as well. The data of people killed in floods, 3,000 killed in floods last year in the DRC and Rwanda. Cyclone Freddy killed so many. 29 million people are affected by the drought in Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Djibouti, Mauritania, Niger. The IPCC, which is the international community, the science community that produces the reports, speaks of Africa as one of the most vulnerable continents, with 7 of the 10 most vulnerable countries across the world in Africa. So you've got those statistics. You've got the direct impacts of the climate change because of flooding, because of increased heat stroke, the cyclones. You've got the indirect impacts of climate change because of the changing nature of disease. Malaria is spreading. It's becoming further and further in the highlands where we never saw it before in many countries. Dengue spreading. We've got waterborne diseases. We've got foodborne diseases. We're seeing chikungunya. We're seeing a whole series of illnesses. And we've got those socio-economic mediated crisis because of the climate crisis, which is really pushing the food insecurity, creating conflict, pushing conflict, creating and pushing migration and displacement. So, but I want to say there is hope, and actually you touched on it. the key thing in COP28 when the countries came together, 147 countries signed this declaration on health that indicated there are things we can do. And one of the most significant things was when you say the climate crisis is a health crisis, people actually begin to take action, because nobody actually really wants a sick community is not an economically viable community. So there's drivers from the business sector who were pushing, who are responsible for much of the climate crisis, to begin to think, what do we need to do differently? So, there's also, though, what you mentioned, in fact, what all of you mentioned in different ways, there's power within the continent of Africa, because in the climate crisis, there's three things we can do. We can mitigate, and that's absolutely critical, and that's stopping the fossil fuel burning, which is really pushing the greenhouse gases out. We have to do that. What the continent of Africa is doing, and its strategy very much from the health declaration as well, is around adaptation. And you're the continent of African climate activity. And adaptation means creativity. It means new, novel ways of approaching energy. It means redesigning. It means entrepreneurship, whether it's good or bad, but it does create opportunities. But we need to be in this together. The continent needs 290 to about $440 billion in loss and damage over the next few years. That's a phenomenal amount. There was a lot of promises made through the health declaration to say, we have to do this. Actually, health insecurity is global insecurity. COVID showed us that. So we need to take action to do something different. I'm conscious of time, and I can see my time is almost up, but just a couple of more sort of small thoughts on this. What was so striking from the health day, the first health day that was held at COP on the 3rd of December, and Dr. Tedros, the head of WHO, spoke passionately about how if we could see the human face behind the climate crisis, then we might take action. If we understood that the suffering that was being described, the shifts and the changes, the danger of moving to 2 degrees above the pre-industrial state, the danger of that, the danger of the continuous heat and the heat strokes, the danger of the droughts, the danger of famines. If we could see behind that, if we could see people, then something might change. And actually, oddly, it was extraordinary in negotiations, because people brought that message again and again. Actually, people are at the center of the climate crisis. I'll end with one thought, and it's quite a chilling thought, though. I want you to take your mind back to Libya, to the dam, to Derna, in Derna. And, you know, do we think about that? Do we remember? It didn't happen that long ago. 10,000 old people were washed away, were died because of what happened. We knew the dams there were problematic. They had been pointed out. The reason it's a climate-related issue is that Storm Daniel came in from the Mediterranean, as you know, and you got in Derna, you got 100 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours, when normally it would be about 1.5. You got this massive amount. But we're not thinking about that now. And yet, there's many, many people missing still. So one of the things we can do about the climate crisis is to talk about the fact that people are the face of the climate crisis. Women are the face of the climate crisis in Africa. How do we ensure that countries, communities come together and actually acknowledge and stand by the health declaration that they have signed, a whole health community that's prepared to take action? Thank you.
Thank you for that sober reflection on how the human face is necessary and how the climate change crisis is a health crisis. Speaking to the global public health care, our next speaker, Professor Aisha. She's marking up at the moment. She was speaking to the upcoming global state of the world's nursing report and what it means for Africa, particularly with a view to the primary health care and need to build community resilience.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought I was last. It's because I'm a nurse. Usually we are. A lovely segue into this. Hopefully I'm going to brighten things up a bit here with some good news, but with some challenging news. And I'm looking at the audience here, and you've probably thought, oh, nursing, that's an interesting topic to have today. I doubt there are any nurses here. I know there are 3 because they're my 2 master's students and 1 very successful PhD student who I made come about 15 minutes before it started. I said, nurses need to be at this conversation. So they are here. But I'm sure most of you either have someone in your family who is a nurse, you know a nurse, or maybe there's a burning desire inside yourself to be one. It is not too late. We need you. So I'm going to talk to you about a global crisis, a global health crisis that is existing. And some of you, or maybe most of you, are not aware of it. So we've heard from our other speakers, but actually the nursing workforce is one that is hugely important to many of the things we've talked about so far. And I'm going to take you back a little bit to try and explain what this wonderful thing is here. This is the landing page of the National Health Workforce Accounts at the WHO. Now, back in 2016, at the World Health Assembly, they adopted the progressive implementation of a National Health Workforce Accounts, which also included annual reporting to WHO. And the purpose of this was to ensure that we had, or member states had, accurate workforce data that was reliable, but also accessible. And the premise behind that was to support member states in their workforce planning. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. You've been asked about when are the elections. This one's a little bit easier. It's only one question. Does anyone know how many nurses there are globally? And we're talking millions. Who said that? You see, we have supporters. Okay, exactly. Although sometimes asking for more nurses is not the right thing for us to ask for. Okay, because sometimes we have enough in certain places, they're just not doing the right thing that they should be doing. But currently, on a 2020 data, there are 29.1 million nurses globally. The stock, that's the stock, the health workforce stock, if we take into account doctors, pharmacists, midwives as well, is about 65 million. So we account for almost 50% of the global health workforce. That is huge, bearing in mind that probably 90 to 95% are women. And we've heard about gender being a really significant issue, but that's a talk for another day that we can have. So the shortage currently sits at approximately 7 million nurses. Now, to educate a nurse takes 3 years, 4 years on some programs, and that is a significant number that are short. Now, what I want to show you is this map, a bit similar to Liz's, because actually it looks very similar in terms of colour, the depth of colour in that region of Africa and into the Eastern Mediterranean region. And what we know from the State of the World's Nursing Report, the State of the World's Nursing Report was published in 2020. It was a programme of activity linked to the National Health Workforce Accounts implementation programme. The first time we were able to get workforce data across all member states that helped us understand what this global workforce looked like. And it showed us this, which is quite startling. Again, there is this disparity, inequalities going on. The backdrop to this is unethical recruitment from the Western countries, pandemics, conflict, and a maturing workforce globally. So this isn't a story about Africa per se. The challenges that we are facing, we face in this country, the same as Africa. We cannot attract, recruit, retain. We have an aging workforce. We have a nursing profession that is not invested in and that governments do not see the worth of. And actually, you as the public are, I guess, influenced by the media, and what we see is clapping. We don't want clapping. Okay, we want investment, we want action. There is no point having thousands of ventilators for people with COVID. There is no point having lots of fancy health systems if you do not have the workforce that is going to provide the direct care to you, your families, and people who need it. So 81% of the world's nurses are found in countries that account for half of the world's population. And you'll see here in Africa, I think the data, if I've got it right, yep. 85.1% of countries in Africa have nursing personnel density less than 30 per 10,000. The median is about 49, but the proportion, the largest proportion of that low density is happening in Africa. The question is, what are we going to do about it? We have some ethical guidance from WHO around recruitment, etc. That's not really working. We've seen that here in the UK and other countries. But what we do know is nursing is central to achieving universal health coverage, achieving sustainable development goals, and actually attaining them, sustaining them, and accelerating them, because we've seen a dip in them post-COVID. During COVID, we were kind of on target for SDGs, but now we need to catch up with things. So nursing is essential for that. The other thing I would like to say, really the final point, so I've made my point about how important nursing is. I've made my point about these National Health Workforce accounts. The good news is Dr. Tedros last year in Canada announced that there would be a second State of the World's Nursing Report. This is fundamental to keep it on member states' agendas. They have signed up to this. So remember, WHO cannot legislate. It's doing a fantastic job. The HRH unit in Geneva, I spent last year working there with them, run by Dr. Jim Campbell, and Tedros. Dr. Tedros are hugely supportive around this initiative because they understand the importance of it. The second report will be fundamental to us understanding progress that we have made since the first one. Now, some of that was completeness of data, reliability of it. So last year and into this year, we are working with all member states, with governments, chief nurses, regulators, educational institutions to try and get complete data reported into the National Health Workforce account so we can see where there is progress. If there is no progress, then hopefully we can at least hold member states to account. Why are you not investing? Why is there no action? And we see globally there is unrest, there is poor working conditions, there is, some nurses aren't even getting paid. We know that in Africa and in other countries in South America. Work conditions are very difficult with violence, etc. So this is an opportunity with the State of Nursing for us really to use this report to leverage build political capital, social capital, engage with the populations of countries. So rather than clapping, asking serious questions about why workforce is not invested in. So I guess my plea to you is think about nursing, ask where it is in this agenda, any agenda around governments in elections. Where is the health workforce, particularly nursing, the biggest one? We know that when nurses are paid appropriately, they will invest that in their children's education, and within society, the economic impact and return on investment, we understand that exists. And the second thing is, if you're actually that interested, please visit the National Health Workforce accounts. It's really interesting. You can profile not just by region, but also by country. And you will see the progress this year. The State of the World's Nursing Report will be published next year. There are workshops being run across member states to support countries in that. So WHO are doing a really great job, and the team there also. And hopefully you will see nursing in a different light after today and have it at the forefront of your mind. Here endeth my plea. Thank you.
Thank you for that insightful take on the importance of nurses in the healthcare industry. To further that agenda, we also have another speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Banda, who is going to speak to the post-pandemic response in Africa and connected to the impact on communicable and non-communicable disease across the continent. And I'm also excited to hear about his new book as well. Dr. Jeffrey?
I know you're tired, but I'll make it short. I'll make it in 5 minutes, hopefully. So I'll talk about three things. The first one is demographic and disease epidemiological shifts. And the second one is cancer care in pandemic, which is this book that has just been published, which is A Labor of Love. And third, I will talk about what is the progress after the COVID-19 pandemic. So the first thing is Africa has the youngest population in the world. The median age is about 18.8 years. And if you look at the documents, the strategy documents for the African Union, they talk of the demographic dividend. However, about 11 years ago, doing research on pharmaceutical production, I met someone in South Africa who raised something that really hit me hard. He said, do you realize that in 20, 30 years' time, that was 10 years ago, this demographic dividend will turn into a demographic bomb? And I was taken aback. But the argument is, as the living standards improve, there will be a shift in the type of diseases that you have on the African continent. So if you look at global health security thrusts, is on HIV, malaria, and TB, mostly infectious diseases. And when you have a healthcare system that was inherited from colonial times, that was focusing on certain things, it is going to be very difficult actually to start to take care of diabetes mellitus, take care of hypertension, to take care of cancer. And the workforce training, the curricula, and even the infrastructure in the hospitals was not set up to do this. So that is something that's really, really important. And if you look at cancer, for example, top right, you'll find that in 2022, 882,000 new cases of cancer and over 500 deaths in 1 year. And the focus is that by 2030, there will be 1 million deaths from cancer per year. If you look at survival rates, it's about 12% compared to over 80% in rich countries. And if you look at the middle bottom figure, the deaths from HIV/AIDS about 630,000. Malaria is about 600,000, but from Africa about 508,000. So do you see the demographic shift that will occur? There's good work that has been done on HIV and TB and everything else, but we have let our eyes off the ball in terms of preparing for non-communicable diseases. So first thing out. The second thing is this book about cancer care in pandemic times. About 6 years ago, we met and we said, people are looking at everything else, but nobody has focused on cancer. And what this work has basically shown us is that our healthcare system may not be working as best as we would want to in terms of cancer care. If you look at clinicians, they use, well, let me put this mildly. Generally, the blame is placed on the patient that they present late at the hospital and they come when they're at stage 4. But the work that we've done is actually shown that people, when they start feeling unwell, they present at the hospital early enough. But for some, it takes 18 months to 24 months to actually get a diagnosis. And then by that time, things are not okay. And so diagnostic capabilities as well are not in place. The clinical staff at the first port of call may not be attuned or looking out for cancer cases. And so it takes a long time and people go on a ping pong, private sector, health, public health sector, and elsewhere to be diagnosed. And one of the things that we found, which is really said, is that there is no local production, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, of oncology products, even pain medication. And that's something that's difficult. And it comes back to an argument we've made for a long time, that local health is a key, local production of drugs is a key underwriter of local health security. And local health security is the basis or the foundation for global health security. Now to the third thing, and I've got 1 minute, pressure on the boy child. What is the progress that has been made post-COVID? So there are two very important lessons that got home to African leaders after COVID. The first one is, in times of crisis, you are on your own. That got home. We've been trying to tell policymakers this for over 10 years on the work that we've done, and it got home. The second one is local pharmaceutical production is a national health security issue. And as a result of that, you find that there was a flurry of activity in local vaccine manufacturing. We had 4 countries which manufacture pharmaceuticals: Egypt, Senegal, Tunisia, and South Africa. But Ghana came on stream, and not come on stream. They have they have plans to do local manufacture, and Kenya has actually brought BioVax on stream. And the second thing is shut up. And then the second and last thing is that the global health procurement agencies have all of a sudden have a change of mind. They're saying we want the diagnostics and the drugs and vaccines to be made locally, and we'll buy them locally. That's all, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey.
Did I redeem the born child?
You did exceptionally, exceptionally. I think your dedication to time and your commitment to actually sticking to it is just a testament to how impressive your book is. Because actually, so one of the dividends of being a moderator is that I do have a copy of the book and I have gone through it. Well, most of you are not that lucky. So if you cannot moderate one of his panels, then I suggest you buy the book. It's awesome.
Oh, sorry. The book is open access. So if you go to that, so as editors, we said we will forgo the payment, let it be open access. So it is open access, and you can, if you follow the link that was on the slide, you can actually download everything.
Even more impressive. Thank you so much. At this point, we'll be taking questions from the audience. Okay.
Use this one? No, you.
Have one person there.
Okay, thank you a lot. I'm so glad to be here and to listen to you. I want to ask you 2 questions to Dr. Tom Molony and Madam Joyce. I'll start with Doctor. You were talking about election in Africa. Do you think that election are necessary in Africa today? Because if I go back to my home country, DRC, where I'm from, in 2018, we have spent more than 600 million to elect a president, the actual president, or Tshisekedi. Then, actually, last December, we have again spent more than what we spent last time. But unfortunately, the president, during his time as president, he didn't do anything for people. If we go again to Mali before Ibrahim came in power, Mali have lost more than $700 to elect Mr. Kabore, who was again put out. So, considering our development, our we need for social life, do you think that Africans must go ahead by organizing elections that are not important for us? And for Madam Joyce, thank you. We're talking about time, that in Africa we don't respect time. That is a big issue for me, but I don't want to be patient with them. So what we have to do to learn to our people to respect the time, because I don't want to go to office for 7 a.m. and to be attended at 10 a.m. So what we have to do for them to be aware of that? Thank you.
Do you want to answer, or are we doing a round of a few questions? Yeah. Okay. The case for dictatorships. I believe in freedoms, freedom to vote, freedom of association, freedom to express beliefs, freedom of the media and others. And I think they're good things. There was almost in what Samuel was saying, a sort of an implication that you wouldn't bother with elections because they're a waste of money. I can see the side of that as well. It might be the way that things are starting to go. The country you mentioned, Malawi, I don't remember with DRC, but I was talking about it with some postgraduate students this morning about the latest Afrobarometer indications on leanings towards autocracy. And we're seeing it increasingly in countries, actually, many of them are quite closely aligned with Russia, perhaps by coincidence, but also some other countries less so. Of more concern, actually, with elections is that we know Africa has a very large youthful population, but there's an increasing disinclination for the youth to want to vote. So I'm taking you as youthful yourself, sir, and you might just be one of those, one of the demographic, increasing demographic that is perhaps saying, you know, elections aren't worth it. People don't turn up. Those that do turn up. Also, in terms of military rule, it tends to be younger people who are more in favor of saying it's okay to kick out an ineffective government, a military to kick out an ineffective government. Amusing I had on that with the class this morning, perhaps, is that those young people haven't experienced military dictatorships. I've not myself, but I've read enough about them to think they're not a good thing. Answer.
Yeah, about the time issue. We have to be very conscious about the cultural shift and the mindset of each country and the region that we are going to trade in. It's not something that is going to change overnight. But I believe, and from the experience, I traveled to different African countries to do business, I can see a shift starting to come up. Particularly post-pandemic, I think because of Teams, Zoom, and that, things are shifting. And there is an improvement, a lot of room to improve yet. I wouldn't say it's lack of respecting time more than cultural norms. Somebody has got a meeting which is scheduled for 8 o'clock. They start chatting and small talk and coffees. A meeting for 1 hour goes for 2 hours, and it has an impact to the others. Things are changing now, not too many coffees and teas and juices being served in between. Talk, go out, and let the other person come. And the younger generation, like you, are coming up, who are entering these offices, are the ones who are going to change this, and it's gradually coming there. So we also have to be aware of the cultural norms, and these don't change overnight.
Can I add to that? I think it's actually quite a dynamic situation. I think it's not something you could generalize. So if you think about, you know, when you've got an appointment with the British High Commissioner or the American Embassy for your visa, you don't show up late. You know, Africans know this, right? If you've got a job interview, you don't show up late. So it's just understanding, you know, how much, you know, respect for time is associated with which activities, and then you manage accordingly.
I think we can lead the change since most of the younger generation is here. So I'm just going to start by imposing a 1 minute, possibly 30-second time limit on questions, please. Yes, so we have one at the back.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Thank you very much for the wonderful conversation. In fact, I had you know, a couple of questions to ask because I self-nominated myself on behalf of the group. The first question I would like to ask is on the nursing and healthcare industry. And recently there have been there's been a trend of the movement of nurses and healthcare professionals from the global majority to the global minority. And this is feeding into the this is feeding into the deficiency that already exists within the system. So put investment aside. What regulatory frameworks do you think should be put in place to ensure that this movement does not only end up as a talent drain, but a skill enhancement trend? And let me just add my other question. That one is about a comment I think Tom made about Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali leaving ECOWAS. And my question is to ask how you envision this impacting the local economies of ECOWAS countries, especially Ghana and Nigeria. And consequently, how do you think this would impact the acceleration of AFTA? Thank you.
One more. One more.
Hi. I'll make it brief, but it's a concern about climate change. Prof had mentioned something about climate change and all, but it makes me reflect my few years with the health facility in Nigeria before coming to Edinburgh. I kind of found out that people would rather go for medications for a present relief before they come to the hospital. So, and like you mentioned from the COP28, that making climate change an health issue makes it more realistic. Well, I don't want to doubt this, but I'd like you to elaborate more with how Africans treat illnesses and how the COP28 is thinking this can be, how to drive more home this buzzword of climate change. Do you think this can really be effective? That's question number one. Then the next thing is, how do you think it can be presented? Because most Africans can't relate with what climate change is actually. So how do you think it can be presented? And the issue of how do you think it could be addressed or faced in Africa?
Okay, so our speakers, who's up?
Do you want me to? I can answer the question. That was an excellent question. My nurse colleagues, that was a good question. A fantastic question, and really an interesting one, and one that we are discussing currently and have been discussing with colleagues at WHO, etc. So the current state of play that we are seeing at the minute is the WHO have a global code of practice on the international recruitment of health personnel called the code. There's an advisory group. Within that, from March, the latest, what we would call red list countries, so the countries that we are safeguarding, we've identified those who have the most pressing issues around workforce, where we are seeing recruitment, active, aggressive recruitment. There are 55 countries. What that does is not, again, WHO's role is not legislative, but it's showing to member states, these are countries you should not recruit from. Now, here in the UK, we have seen that happen. It's happening. And I think one of the things that we have to be very careful of are unintended consequences when we start putting in place legislative policies. And we've seen that in Kenya earlier last year, where nurses could apply for jobs, and bearing in mind, this is an industry. We are seeing this as an industry in countries. So we have diaspora here, they're sending financial money in aid back to their families. So those are it's a complex situation, but we saw it where the UK government were, saying, okay, we will recruit nurses, but they need to be unemployed, not in a job. And the unintended consequences was nurses then resigned so they could be unemployed, so they could apply for the job. So again, we have to be very clear about what it is we're doing here when we think legislation or regulation is the answer. What we have seen as quite a successful way of looking at this several years ago are something called global skills partnerships, where governments have worked together. We cannot stop people taking jobs. That's the reality. There will be migration, there will be movement, but how do we manage that in an ethical, safe way? And we see it done with medics. So there are agreements between governments, for example, Sri Lanka and the UK government with medics who will come to this country for X number of years and they will return to their home country. So I think it's definitely something that as a community we need to engage with. We need to get together and figure out how we are going to do this. WHO are very aware of it, but it's not their total responsibility. Member states have to engage. The WHO is very supportive, producing guidance, but as governments and as a society for the common good, we have to come together for a solution around this. So that's kind of where we are. I think there's probably other points, but we could speak about it later if you like.
Yes, thank you.
There was the question of if you had £1 million, which Africa would you go to? I don't know whether £1 million or £1 billion going to Africa is going to give any solution. It will start with, what do you want to do? When you go back to Africa, what is your intention? What do you want to go and do there? You have to start from somewhere. And as I said earlier, you have to have a philosophy of why you want to go to do business in Africa, if it's business. And what is it that you are taking there that is innovative for you to go and kind of disrupt and do things differently? Then you will find your footing there. It's not just about the money, unless you want to be philanthropic. It is about what are you going to do there and how are you going to work with the ecosystem that is there to make profits in whatever you are doing and also have an impact within that community or society that you're working in. Taking into consideration all the other challenges and risk factors. Then, once you have that, answer what you want to do, I am sure your 1 million will help you a great deal and help others.
Thank you.
I think there's an aspect of what you spoke about, Farai, that we have presented a very negative view of Africa. And maybe let me correct that with my experience from the pharmaceutical industry. Do you know that there is a South African company that reverse engineered a COVID vaccine? Do you know that a South African company called BioVac started from scratch and came up with a vaccine which is out-licensed to a Japanese company? So maybe we came across and presented this doom and gloom picture of Africa, but there's a lot of exciting stuff that's going on the African continent. Kenya established a vaccine manufacturing company, vaccine manufacturing establishment, and there are a host of other centers, AI, whatever, supercomputing that's going on in Nairobi, in Ghana, and elsewhere. So I think maybe given the short time that we may have painted this picture of a desperate Africa that needs a knight in shining armor to come and sort it out. I don't think that's correct. There's a lot of good stuff that's going on the continent. Thanks.
Absolutely. And just a final comment then around the climate crisis and as a health crisis. And there's great questions. And in a sense, you answered the question yourself, because I could talk about ocean acidification, I can talk about sea rise, I can talk about rain bombs, I can talk about deforestation. And that's what the climate scientists did. But actually, all of that, the reason all of those matter is that when people and planet are harmed, then we're challenged. We no longer can live. Our livelihoods are being destroyed. And that's why the climate crisis is a health crisis. And that's why in September in Kenya, when the Africa Summit, Climate Summit came together, it was so powerful because it was this message. We need to really think differently. But you asked such an important question at the end. What do we do about it? How do we address this? And the key around the climate crisis being a health crisis is that unless we tackle the health system, and unless we strengthen the health system in every country, but particularly in countries where there's a fragile health system, as we talked about, which are many countries, and unless we tackle the disease burden, then the numbers are going to increase. Those who are ill are going to increase. And every person who goes to the hospital, every person who goes to the facility, every person with an illness, which is all of us at some point in our lives, and it will be, our carbon footprint becomes heavier. We actually drain off the planet. So what we need to think about is how do we promote wellness? How do we ensure that we can reduce the disease burden that's there? But on the positive side, there's so much opportunity to really listen to how many people are responding to the climate crisis in their own situation, creating novel ways of alternative energy, novel ways to support hospital systems, novel ways to manage crop rotation. We need to learn, and we actually need to learn again from those who've been doing this for centuries. Part of our problem is we've forgotten. So thank you for the opportunity just to reflect again on the extraordinary wisdom that lies in every country.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to our panel as well. As we draw our discussion to a close, I really hope this conversation has sparked new ideas, new insights, and vistas for collaboration in the future. At this point, I would like to introduce the CEO of the Royal African Society and invite her to give closing remarks.
So stay where you are. Thank you very much. And let me come up here to avoid the moving of the microphone too much. I want to say thank you so much to the panel for an amazing discussion this evening. A completely fresh perspective, but threading through everything we've heard tonight. So many ideas about the interactions between all 54 countries on the continent, its regions, its peoples, and this country, not only the UK, the diasporas who are here, the researchers who are here, the students, the people who are doing business and trading between us all. We're interconnected. We have Mary here, who is a student, but has been working previously as a lawyer, who has brought her knowledge and experience and given us a fantastic moderation this evening. And I want to thank you, Mary, for doing that. And thank you for bringing your fan club. Thank you, fan club, for enlivening us this evening. I also want to thank Seth from Global Edinburgh, and I want to thank Hazel from the the Centre for African Studies here at Edinburgh University. And I want to thank my colleagues from the Royal African Society who've been also working in the background to make this this happen tonight. We are very proud of this connection between the Royal African Society and Edinburgh. I think we all know that between Scotland and the continent, there are long and deep-rooted and historical and wide connections that run through so many different disciplines, through so many families, so many countries. And it's really wonderful to be able to celebrate those tonight and to hear more and to share the discussions. And we had another event like this down in London last week, and actually again got another perspective. The more perspectives that we can share between the continent and this country, the more informed we will be and the better our knowledge and understanding will take us forward. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to those people who've been online as well. And may you go safely into the night and the gale force winds that are blowing out there, and get home safely at the end of all of this. God bless you all. Thank you.
We have a drinks reception just as you exit. So please make sure you take something and refresh yourself. Thank you very much for coming.